Meeting is technically half mine. Brian, do you have a quorum?
We do have a quorum, Rob, so we can go ahead and proceed.
I think I do too. So I'm going to open the advisory committee meeting, call it to order and call the roll. Gina Stino.
Present.
Mike Barclay.
Present.
Fran Collins. Nope. Patrick Kennedy.
Here.
Mark Maggi. I think he told me he would not be able to attend. Ellen Marr.
Present.
Mary McGoldrick.
Present.
And Meg Wheeler.
Present.
And Rob Hillman, I too am present. So we are open. Brian?
Great, I'll do the same. So our meeting is open, roll call vote. I'll start with myself, Brian Host, present. Michael Dick. Michael, you're on mute instead of a wave.
No,
Rob,
I'm here. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Susan Franklin,
Here.
Francine Lyons. So that's not present. And then Ralph Dormitzer. So Ralph is on, but doesn't appear to be promoted. Just to be clear, he's an associate member, so we do not need him for to actually voice in to have the quorum. So I think we've got our quorum and we're underway.
Great. Okay, so on the agenda that advisory posted, we described a joint meeting with the Capital Budget Committee regarding capital budget items, capital budgeting, and capital projects, by which we mean capital budget items in terms of requests going into the upcoming annual town meeting, capital budgeting, meaning the overall treatment of capital in the annual budgets year over year, and capital projects would include all potential future significant capital projects, but particularly some that are especially large. Some folks have started to use the word generational. Not sure my vocabulary goes that far, but we know what they are. We'll talk about them. So with respect to, so I guess we're going from the particular to the general in some respects. So Brian, why don't we start with the fiscal year 24 capital requests that your committee has on its plate, or or which you've received, well, on its plate either because they're self-generated or they've come in from specific departments as part of this year's budget planning process?
Sure. So as I think you accurately summarized, we're going to work from the particular to the general. And this process is probably going to feel a little bit different than the discussion we've had in years past. Typically, capital budget, works through our entire request process for the year and has that, completely narrowed down to what we've approved and recommended. And then we bring it to advisory and to the select board. That typically happens much later in the cycle. This year, we're handling it a little bit differently and coming to you much earlier, in part because we want you to understand exactly what we're going to be working through this year, which is to some degree a repeat of past years, working a very large number of requests into a much smaller funding bucket. But it also, as Rob mentioned, really is the right time to open a discussion about a more general funding issue that the capital budget is facing on a recurring and certainly on a forward-looking basis. And it's also very important to start, I think, socializing and at least identifying and acknowledging some of the bigger projects and the asks that are clearly not going to fit within, an annual capital budgeting cycle, whether it be with or without debt. So you're probably going to see us more than once this cycle. And I think, today is probably going to be more of a sharing discussion, so that everyone is sort of, I think, ready for some of the discussions that are going to need to take place. With that, I'd love to dive right into the specifics. And Rob, I guess if I just click share screen, I can pull up a spreadsheet. Is that correct?
Something will happen. Let's
All
see.
right, let's see what happens here.
Yeah, I think that's how it works.
That is not what, let's share this screen.
No, I don't want this one.
Okay, let's try this one. Hold on a second.
Good evening, Fran. I
Here.
noted you down as being present when you arrived.
Okay. Hi, Fran. Okay, so I'm going to start with a document that Michael Dick sent over to Rob and Mike Barkley. Hopefully it found its way to the rest of the advisory committee. It's called this fiscal 24 requests. And what this is specifically is simply a compilation of the fiscal 24 requests that exist in our 10-year plan, okay, which is a separate document. This isn't new or different. This is just simply a more compact and much more easily readable version of the fiscal 24 requests. The first summary just summarizes by department. It works down to a total of 7.3 million, as you can see. When we get to the 10-year plan, you're going to see that there's a difference of about 400,000. That's because we found a few redundancies. I won't bore you with what they are, but we stripped those out, and they will get fixed in the 10-year plan, and those numbers will come in line. So it's not a typo or a calc error. But here you can see the major buckets. I would tell you these are a little bit misleading. So for example, when we get to DPW and facilities, you will see that there are a very significant number of requests that are really school items, but we group them into the department who actually has responsibility for execution of the projects. So in the case of DPW, they have accountability for things like sidewalks and roads. You'll see that when we get to it, including the parking lots and access roads and sidewalks around the schools. And then facilities has a responsibility for execution of anything that relates to one of the buildings. Okay, so what you're going to see in the school budget after we separate out the $2 million request for a feasibility study, you're going to see $687,000 of stuff that is clearly not buildings and not site infrastructure. Okay, that's what's left in the school number, and it's not done that way for financial management purposes. It's done that way for execution accountability purposes. So with that, let me switch to the actual detailed requests on the next page. Well, before I go, obviously, line 14 is a rough guesstimate of what we're going to have available to spend. That number needs to be clarified with Chris and Jennifer Mullen, but it'll be somewhere close to that, which leaves us with a pretty significant gap. Moving on to the details, moving on to the detail here. Let me see if I can increase the size of the screen. Yeah, didn't work very well.
Down at the bottom, you've got that toggle to 100%. You can make it bigger.
Oh, I didn't get the whole thing.
How big is it? Are you guys able to see it okay?
Yeah.
Are you? Okay. So I can tinker otherwise. Okay, so we'll start with the schools and the 2.6 million, 2.7 million. As I mentioned earlier, this is everything but buildings and site infrastructure. We've got our school bus lease. Why? Okay, something's wrong here. I'm not actually seeing the numbers on this.
Hey, Brian, Brian, it's Mike. I formatted the print area to include 5 columns, and I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not seeing the numbers. Hold on, maybe I.
Yeah, it's been split over 2 pages by your computer. If you enable editing, you might be able to change the view to normal.
Let me see if I can do that.
Or I can put it up from my computer.
Having just struggled with this at work, Brian, I think if you enable editing and then go to page setup, you're able to then include everything in the print screen and have all 5 columns in there.
Let me try one other thing here.
Mike, you look too old to know how to do that.
You're right. You're absolutely right.
Let me try this and see if that works. Hold on. Did that work?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. A little slow, but I do figure things out. Okay. Okay, now we have numbers. This is so much more. Oh my. So as I was saying earlier, so schools, I don't want to hit on every one of these, but let me hit on the big buckets. School buses, you know, the lease we have in here from now until the end of time. And the number will get adjusted, but that item will remain. The other big projects that are in the or big items, you know, we have the Chromebook lease. We pay that for 3 years, and then we get about another 2 years of life, and that number will go away. But the other big project that's in here in terms of IT is the first wave of updating the schoolroom technology. When we rolled out the digital learning project back in 2017, we put overhead projectors, document cameras, things of that nature in each of the classrooms. They are reaching end of life, and also the technology has changed in a good way. It's become much more simple and integrated, easy to install. You can actually move it room to room if necessary. They're basically using touch screens with a sound bar on them now. They attach to a computer, and it just dramatically simplifies things. But it's not cheap. So this is just for the middle school. We'll see 4 waves of this. This is the 4 buildings that'll get rolled out. Yes, Gene.
There's something wrong with your sound. You keep fading out, and I can barely hear you, and then you come back. So I don't know if you're maybe not close enough to where your microphone is, or I don't know.
I'm guessing that my hand is over the microphone. How do I sound now?
Okay,
You sound fine, yeah.
you sound
Yeah,
fine.
I have a funny feeling that the microphone is actually right underneath my trackball, so I will make sure I don't put my palm over it. And if I go silent again, just raise your hand. I'll try to respond.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll be seeing that, every year for the next 4 years. The number will actually go up when we do the high school, because it's substantially more rooms than either of the other three clusters or buildings. It's also time to replace the original iPads in the Deer Hill and Joseph Osgood schools. They're 6 years old, pretty much end of life. We're also doing one grade at a time in terms of replacing furniture, both desks and student desks. Just a lot of broken furniture and frankly some stuff that's creating a
Frustrated.
corpse hazard in the environment. So instead of doing it all at once, we're doing basically a grade per year and sort of shuffling around some of the better equipment until we can get to the next grade. And then we have some things that are probably more, I would say, optional in terms of when they come, if they come. So there's a request for a $250,000 fitness center up at the high school, the middle high school. Is a suggestion that they do that, spread that over 5 years. That's their suggestion, not ours. And we're still sort of processing that request. The football scoreboard, and then 2 athletics transportation buses, which we've never really had in the fleet in the past. Much further down the priority list as the school prioritizes, and I think we would concur with that. So that brings us to the big item on their list, which is $2 million for a feasibility study for a new middle high school. And that's we'll circle back, I think, to these big requests later, but I just want you to understand what's on here. Moving on to DPW, they have an infrastructure line. We put in place a roads program about 5 years ago that basically assumed we would, didn't basically, calculation yielded a plan that we would spend approximately $5,000 to $6,000 a year on roads based on the then current cost of road replacement. And about, roughly speaking, 180, 200,000 of that would come from the state each year. And the capital budget agreed to chip the other 300 to get us 500. and then we'd see how that worked and true it up as necessary. There was a road study done last year that produced some pretty, eye-popping suggestions in terms of what it was actually going to cost to replace our roads. It was very different than our past experience. There's a request in to increase that number to $1 million a year. We don't have a view on whether or not that's right or wrong. We will be working through that and figuring it out. And whatever the number is, we're going to need to fund our roads. So this is a, it's certainly going to be a very substantial step up either this year or next year for our road funding to a new level, which will then run and grow, in perpetuity from that new, much higher number. So this is a very, very big increment in terms of what we're going to need to fund going forward. It might, yes, Fran.
Yeah, I have a basically tentative resurfacing schedule here, and it looks like it's going to run for this year about almost $2 million for the roads they want to do. And the roads need to be done, but the high cost of asphalt and everything else that goes along with it is just blowing us out of the ballpark here.
Yeah, so a few things. First of all, the price of oil is done a round trip and it's now back at pre-pandemic levels. So how this plays out in terms of the cost of asphalt will be interesting to see. Certainly at peak COVID, there were some very, very big prices being thrown around for work in every sector, including the public sector. And so it's, I think we need to be vigilant as to where this, settles out. Also, I haven't seen the spreadsheet that you have in front of you, Fran, but you should be aware that at least going into the summer, we had $1.5 million worth of prior year appropriations the capital budget had set aside, as well as Chapter 90 funds that had been received by the state that had not been spent over during the COVID period because for whatever reason, I'm not sure. But so it's entirely possible that of that 2 million, a big chunk of that is funded by the 1.5 that was sort of accumulated when we were not able to execute during COVID. And some of the roads are also, and we haven't had this discussion with Brian Joyce in this cycle yet. That's going to happen Monday. But some of our roads actually get replaced, by national, or the funding at least comes from National Grid when we put down a new road and then they tear it open. So that could also be inflating that, it's not inflating it. It's in your $2 million number. It may not come out of our pockets, I guess is what I'd say.
Yeah, these are gross numbers, and you're right. The gas company's going to pay for some, and we do have quite a bit of big set aside. So I just have to have the
but you're spot on. I mean, these
5-6 years. Yeah,
these are big numbers. We absolutely have to continually replace our roads. It's not optional. We don't do it, a road this year, then we're just going to have to do 2 roads next year. And these numbers are going to be big, and right now they're not built into the capital budget funding mechanisms. That's, we're going to come back to this in a couple of minutes. So that's DPW. Infrastructure. There is a roads committee. Ralph Dormitzer's on that. We will get to the bottom of this, and we will put in place a new plan that makes this work, because we don't have any choice. Moving on to the broader DPW requests. The first 2 are kind of what you traditionally think of DPW, which is, 2 pieces of equipment. And then the next 4 are basically site infrastructure up at the schools. 3 of them are roads and sidewalks. And then you'll see on line 20, there's a request for a bus parking lot up there, which, we're going to need to do some work to figure this out. It's just a very big number to find a home for buses, given the amount of empty tarmac that we've got around town. But the reality is that these are kind of like a hot potato. They used to be up at the DPW. They didn't want them there. No one else seems to be willing to open up their lots to these buses in terms of other departments and assets throughout the town. And so right now the transportation revolving fund is I think paying a decent amount of money. It's probably somewhere around $35,000 a year to park these buses out on 3A, right by the Situate town line, just south of Abishon. So that's where they are right now. And we, as well, I shouldn't say we, but the school revolving fund is the transportation revolving fund paying to store those buses there. I'd love to find a place for these in town with us, $500,000 to create a spot for them. It just seems like, given all the other capital requirements that we have, a painful way to spend that much money.
Brian. Two things. One is your sound is very much in and out again. But also not now, but at some point, I'd be interested in a little bit more information about this foundation for the sentence that they used to be stored at the DPW, but they don't want them there anymore. I'm sure they have a serious and well-grounded reason to not park those buses on town land that we already own for $0, but I've never heard a satisfactory explanation for why they got moved out. So, but not now. We're at a sufficient level of detail to not get into that sort of thing.
I agreed, Rob. I wish I knew how to do something about my volume level.
Keep it right where you are now. You sound great.
Okay.
Just
Yeah.
keep cutting out.
I'll try not to move. So, moving on to facilities, there are a number of school building related items that fall under facilities, as all the buildings fall under facilities. And then the big ones are retiling the classrooms at Deer Hill School. We did the hallways already, so now it's finish up with the classrooms. There's a request for a generator up at Osgood, which I think we're going to need to really understand more. The Beechwood Playground capital budget funded in the special town meeting. I think it was $30,000 to actually fix broken items. So this is really a request to just completely upgrade that playground. And then we had deferred from several years back a request for a new vehicle because the feeling was that the right vehicle was not available at that point. So that's kind of an overdue item. Moving on to IT, last year we invested roughly $500,000 in the data network as well as the security infrastructure to upgrade both the bandwidth and the protection of all of our digital assets. The vast majority of that work is done, and now the next step is to upgrade the data centers. This is probably going to be, closer to 400. Yeah, Mike's got it here, 432,000 as opposed to 500. But police is pretty much a standard year of requests. In terms of the police cars, we have a program that's been in place for many years now. It's working very well. We buy 2 police cars every year. We buy and retire two police cars every year. Roughly speaking, there's a fleet of about 12 cars, plus a couple of really old spares. We buy these cars, and they come with a 5-year, 100,000-mile warranty. And we basically, run them and rotate them through different roles so that they basically hit the 100,000 miles at the end of year 5. And then we keep them around for another year or 2 after that, and then try to get them out of the fleet before major repairs start turning up. And that's been very effective. We've had some major repairs, but they were within the 5-year, 100,000-mile warranty. We haven't had to pay really a penny for any major repairs since we put this program in place. Tasers, they've moved to a lease model versus ownership. Fire, line 35, this is effectively 3 new employees with the fire gear that they actually wear into an active fire scene. They need each person needs two pairs. They are relatively, they're not custom made, but they're, they have to be sized specifically. So we can't just recycle these from one person to the next. And it costs about $10,000 per person to get that 2 pairs Line 37, this is for the rebuild of pier at Government Island. And then 38, line 38 is the new facility assessment for the first responders, police and fire. So those are the requests in front of us. You're looking at, $7.3 million worth of requests. I would say that, of that, you've got 3.2, roughly speaking, that are sort of special requests, not the sort of stuff that we see, year in, year out, just managing the departments. And that would include, the $2 million for the middle high school study, feasibility study, as well as these last two items, the Government Island rebuild, as well as the police and fire facility assessment. Chris, I don't know if you have an update on Government Island. I know there was some discussion that might be sliding out to next year's. Do we have any update on that? Sounds like we might have
Yes.
lost Chris. Sorry.
Yeah. The answer is yes, it's delayed for a year.
It's not going away.
That was easy.
We're just going to have the same problem next year, but that gets us $1 million closer to making this fit this year. So that is really the overview for.
Brian, I have a question on the assessment for the new facility, public safety. It's the first I've heard of this $200,000 assessment. Do you have any detail on that?
Well, I don't yet, because police and fire have not been in front of us and they haven't made a formal request for that. But there was a walkthrough a week ago. Michael, I believe you were on the walkthrough, if I recall correctly. And I think, perhaps Susan or Francine joined you. And, there's a case there that we need to start looking at replacing that building as well, which I don't think comes as a surprise to any of us, but that's the background of it. And, we'll learn more when the chief comes in to present to us. So that's the quick summary of what we're looking at for the funnel. As I mentioned, there's roughly $4 million worth of requests that we're going to try and squeeze into a $2 million bucket. A decent number of these items will not get done this year, plain and simple. There may be some grant funding that we haven't contemplated on some of these items, but by and large, there are a decent number that are just simply not going to get done this year. And I'll just pause there for a moment if there are any questions.
I see Mary's hand.
Yeah, Brian and the rest of the committee, I'm just looking through your charter, so to speak, on capital budget and trying to figure out where the assessments come into a request from capital budget committee. And is it because eventually we're looking at a capital expenditure? I mean, there's a host of issues with the feasibility study for the middle high school, which,
Yes.
so but we will leave that aside. But I'm just curious how that fits into your purview.
It's an interesting question in the sense that, it's directly related to and precedent to and in a preliminary investment in a capital asset fundamentally. Could we creatively put it somewhere else? Maybe. But I think philosophically, when you invest in one of those, it is the first step towards and the first installment of an investment in a major capital asset. And it really shouldn't be done unless really everyone amongst capital budget, advisory, select board, and whatever department is sponsoring it, or an agreement that's actually a project that can and should take place. Otherwise, we're burning money on the study.
Okay, thank you.
And that's a practice that we've seen not followed very recently and repeatedly with respect to capital proposals. I mean, if we're going to have proposals relating to studies, et cetera, for major capital projects, and we're going to articulate a process for doing them, that they get reviewed by the department from which they originate and the select board, it would seem logical that if it's capital related, capital budget looks at it and opines. If it doesn't necessarily even come out of the capital budget, maybe some of these things should be something on which you opine, but they don't necessarily come out of the $2-ish million that you, let's call it, administer. And advisory for a look at, since advisory is just French for FinCom, that we, look at it in terms of overall budget impact. But, and, I think I've said this out loud before, but, the schools and the select board, advanced a proposal to the MSBA with a 9-figure potential price tag without a word to either capital budget or advisory. Now that wasn't accepted, but I think next time around, we should be thinking real hard about who ought to look at that and who ought to back it, because eventually projects of that scope need the backing of the relevant, committees and the relevant constituencies in town. So let's kind of put a footnote next to that as a concept, but also I think Mary's question, if I understand her question correctly, goes to the idea that, these things are things that capital budget should be opining about and giving input to, but are they necessarily, should they come out of your 1.9 or the town budget elsewhere, or should we be recalibrating, what capital budget's pot of money is to cover these sorts of things? And there are similar issues with, capital, well, I've said quite enough. So does anybody else have anything, questions? Brian's just left, but I have that effect on people when I talk.
No, I unfortunately was silencing the background noise.
I see Fran's hand up.
Yes.
I have two questions. Do all 3 schools have a generator now, or is this a replacement one for the Osgood School, or is this a new one?
That is a good question that we'll be addressing with Nick Berardi when he comes before us in approximately 2 weeks. I don't know the answer, Fran. I can tell you what I think, but don't quote this as fact.
Yep.
Okay. What I believe is that the Deer Hill School has a very robust generator, and it's I believe it may even be a whole school generator, and perhaps Gene or Mary can jump in if I get any of this wrong, but I'm pretty sure we put a $200,000 generator up there a few years ago, in part driven by the fact that emergency response is up there. And also, I think that building is used as a warming station, if I'm not mistaken. So I believe there's at least, there is a generator there that powers at least part of that building, so that it can be used in its emergency response function. With regards to the middle high school, my understanding is there is a generator there. I've seen some mention in different places, including the AI3 study, that generator may not be functioning. And then the request on this one, it's not clear if there is a generator up at Joseph Osgood at all, or if there's one that's undersized or just in need of replacement. I don't know the answer, but when Nick comes in 2 weeks, we'll be drilling in.
All right, thank you. My other question is on this.
Ellen and Mary, sorry, let's finish with Fran, and then actually Ellen and Mary both have their hand up. Fran, I suspect they're going to answer your first question better than I just did.
Okay.
I'm going to let Ellen take that because my hand is an old hand, actually.
Sorry.
There's no generator at the Osgood School presently, and a few years back, the school committee had gone to capital budgets for a generator, and Brian Joyce had indicated that he had a very legitimate plan to use portable rental generators, and that one could be in place at the Osgood School in a matter of hours if there were a power outage. I don't know if he's ever had to do that in the past, but there's no generator at Osgood.
And I know we have a couple of spare generators at the DPW garage, so I don't think we're short on generators, but anyway, okay, well, we'll find out when they come. And my other quick question was, that fitness building, room, we're renting equipment at $50,000 a year for. What are we getting for $50,000 a year?
So far the request is a concept. We did ask for, very specific data in terms of, what that $250,000 investment would include. But I can't answer your question other than a comprehensive, exercise room that, based on the schematic that we saw, without any list of equipment, it looked like it had, all the different weightlifting stations, racks, towers, et cetera, as well as some cardio equipment.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll be talking to the school committee anyway, but thank you. I just thought you might have known.
See, Ellen, is that hand from the last time, or did you have something else?
Sorry.
Okay, then Mike, I think was,
Hi. Last night, Brian and I sat in the audience of the school facilities committee. And the outcome of their deliberations last night was to go through the AI3 report and pull out all of the maintenance items that the schools need. And as Brian pointed out in that meeting, this is really the first time that we as a town have a defensible, supportable list of needs. And now, as a first step, that school facilities committee is going to list them, hopefully prioritize them, and then perhaps working together with capital budget and advisory, begin to put some kind of plan in place to get maintenance really front and center. And I'll just put in a little soapbox comment here. Capital budget feels that maintenance really should get the highest priority where possible, so that we're not replacing buildings that really haven't been maintained. So just an FYI, and I'm hopeful that we'll be able to work well with the school facilities committee and develop the list and put a plan in place.
do we expect, I didn't watch that meeting, but I will once it's posted. Do we expect that committee to come into the budget process looking for specifics for maintenance items or things other than the proposed $2 million study?
What was mentioned was that the school facilities committee would generate their list and run that by the school committee for eventual referral over to the select board too. So the way I understand it is it'll go back up to the school committee, and we as capital budget are just standing by ready to help. And we offer that help.
Yeah, the very next step that they're going to take, and just backing up a little bit, the list that they looked at last night was focused on building a 10-year maintenance plan. And the list that they put on screen came out of the AI3 study, which was a comprehensive existing conditions study done by an architecture firm last year. We capital budget voted to approve that study, specifically because we wanted an expert to come in and do a comprehensive survey of every aspect of every one of the school buildings, and produce this punch list and their perspective of priority. The next step, and I think, in fairness to the school committee, they were on the right track. Really the next step is for them to take that list to Nick Berardi and go through it and figure out, really two things. Number one, what are the absolute priorities in terms of urgency, whether it be safety issues that need to be remedied immediately, or whether it be asset protection issues such as a leaking roof that's just going to cause more damage if we don't get on it. And then also, at the opposite end of the spectrum, what are the low-hanging fruit items that, that are sort of easy fixes and don't cost a lot of money and can get a lot of items off the list so that we can focus on the stuff that matters. So really the next step is that they're going to forward the list to Nick, and we suggested that we would be very interested in participating in that conversation as well. I mean, it's a massive list, just to be clear. There were, I think, just in the next few years, there were probably $5 million worth of items for, each of Deer Hill and Osgood. And then, a much larger number for, for the high school. If I remember, Mike, it was somewhere around the area of $35 million, which is part of what's driving, their focus on this study to just replace the building in its entirety. Now, the architect's flagging of timing, sometimes differs from reality. And so we'll be going through that and really figuring out, what needs done when.
Okay, I think just in terms of sticking to our agenda,
Yeah.
we're 3/4 an hour in, and I think
Yep.
we've gone through our first topic, which we're all going to see again, because
Yes.
your committee is going to produce a list for a town meeting, and our committee is going to consider the list for town meeting. And the good news is we now have a big head start on that,
Yep.
because and we'll see what gets prioritized and reported out, what other items that aren't within what you can do might find funding elsewhere. That'll be an interesting conversation. We wanted to talk secondarily, and kind of, not toward a vote on a motion about the capital budgeting process. I pointed out to Brian that their committee had made the case on several occasions that their budget's been at $1.9 million for many years, and that it hasn't inflated, that numbers remain static, which means that number has gone down by definition in terms of what it can purchase. And I reminded myself and then all of you by sending it out that in our budget statement for this fiscal year, we recommended that that concept get some attention, that a capital budget line of $1.9 million is if it's inadequate this year, it'll be less adequate next year. And that, in the further conversations, perhaps, some alternatives to that. And it occurred to me afterward, on both the supply side and the demand side, the supply of money and the demand for money, what should be capital, what maybe ought not be, but also just how do you get money into it so that the capital budget committee can respond to the requests from departments for capital items in a more positive way. The capital budget committee pointed out the problem. We listened and agreed. So we thought we'd focus on that a little bit this evening as well. Brian, if you want to, I think everybody here understands the issue. But sort of what I am not really clear on is sort of, and I don't think anyone is for the purpose of this meeting, but what do we do to get a list of 4 workable solutions, if any workable solutions exist? Well, what are the alternatives, or who can tell us what the alternatives are? And then also, how does this function, in other high functioning towns? How is that's something I didn't occur to me until just recently, but how is this different? So there's about 6 different questions. Just pick a couple and run with them. So
I'm not sure I have the answer to any of them, Rob. What I really wanted to do tonight is just highlight the fact that, we really put our finger on the problem about a year ago. The capital funding mechanism was set roughly in 2010 at roughly $2 million a year. And that number was to include, both the capital that we could appropriate in a given year, after we'd already paid the debt service on, on capital debt that had been put in place previously. And the idea is that the debt would roll off, and more capital would become available, and you'd see that number creep up to $2 million over time. I think people have sensed for years this was not working, okay, in terms of the amount of capital that was available to the departments. I mean, it's, to be clear, it's not our money. We're just a conduit, right? Town gives us an appropriation, and we allocate that out to the departments based on the highest priorities and needs. And, we give away fundamentally every dollar that we get each year back to
You
the
got,
departments.
not to pick a nit, but
Yeah.
I don't think capital budget gets an appropriation. You just make a recommendation at town meeting and.
No, we do get an
Oh, really?
appropriation. We
Huh.
get an appropriation into the capital stabilization fund. And then
Oh,
these
right.
capital items-
Nope, I was wrong.
And then
Sorry.
these the vast majority of capital items are funded back out of the capital stabilization
Nope.
fund.
You're right. I'm wrong.
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
But to your point, Rob, there are a whole bunch of capital items that don't necessarily get funded out of the capital stabilization fund and out of our appropriation process. They're still capital items, and they are still upon by capital budget. So for example, stuff, capital items that get funded by CPC, they fund it, doesn't flow through capital stabilization, but it's still a capital item. We have to review it based on the bylaw. Same thing with, direct grant funding. And there, ARPA, as well as the enterprise funds, both water and sewer. So, they ultimately fund their own capital, but we are obligated to review it and just make sure that it's being done properly. It's a second set of eyes, really, more than anything else when it comes to these other funded mechanisms. But yes,
On those mechanisms, our committees overlap. I mean,
that's correct.
you look and then we look. So,
Yeah. That's absolutely correct. So back to our process, I think there's been an instinctive sense that, we need to do more than what the annual appropriation of the capital stabilization, the budget appropriation was providing for. So there have been, significant amounts of free cash that have gone into the stabilization fund at various special town meetings, really since we started generating free cash about 5 years ago. And everyone's, I think, instincts were on the case. But something really didn't seem to be working in terms of the appropriation and the way it was supposed to play out. And I went back at this time last year and really looked at the numbers because they weren't playing out the way they had been forecast to play out 5 or 6 years earlier. And sure enough, there was an error in the funding mechanism in the spreadsheet. And to make a long story short, it pretty much offset as a result of underfunding, all of the STM appropriations that came out of free cash and got us back, roughly speaking, to this $2 million number over time. This past year, we probably went above it for the first time in aggregate. And so I raised it with Don. He fixed the spreadsheet. The appropriation mechanism is fixed, but it is what it is. I mean, we're still spending $2 million in capital, which is the same number that was earmarked back in 2010. The price of everything that we buy has gone up. The revenues, of the town have gone up at least 2.5% a year. If we had grown in line with revenues of the town, we'd probably have a 40% higher number, right? Setting aside how much the inflation is of the stuff that we're actually buying. So they're, as smart as the mechanism was, they forgot the escalator, and 12 years later, that compounding effect, has created a big delta in terms of funding. The second thing is that, back in 2010, capital budget did not fund roads. So we put this roads program in place about, 3-4 years ago, and took on the funding of that, but did not receive any additional appropriation into the stabilization fund. So, we've been spending $300,000 out of out of this that we weren't on the hook for back in 2010 when it was set up. And that number is about to go up, closer to $1 million, right? So we absolutely do need to address this. And that's really the point more than anything of getting in front of you early in the budgeting process. We need to find a way to start appropriately funding this mechanism. Otherwise, the departments are simply not going to get what they need. when you look at the, when you look at this 10-year spreadsheet, there are a lot of things missing. I will tell you that, the schools numbers that are in this 10-year plan versus what we saw last night are massively low. I mean, we need to and should be spending a lot more on the maintenance of our school buildings. I think that's probably true for all of our buildings. So even the numbers that you've got in front of you are probably pretty woefully understated. So that's where we are. And obviously with regards to the mega projects or the generational projects, they're not going to fit within capital budget. They're going to need to be done, with, across the board, really with excluded debt.
Oh, yeah. One thing that I think is an unknown is prior to me, anyhow, prior to roads being moved into capital budget, capital stabilization under your committee's supervision, we were presumably paying for roads with something. I don't know this, and I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but it would be good to know or learn when that responsibility got moved, where were those funds? Not that it makes a difference. I mean, prior year's appropriations are what they are, but it might help with the categorization of where money went. Also, simultaneous with our budget statement, simultaneously said we should increase the appropriation of the capital stabilization north of $1.9 million, while simultaneously urging the town to maintain its 3 to 4% free cash. Those might be irreconcilable differences. I couldn't say, but I think probably this is a place where the finance director could begin to get involved and also to talk about models from other towns who we would like to be like. Not every other town is doing it right, I suspect. Right. But are there other models for this that work better? Because we don't want to, we can't starve the capital function, but I think we all know, and I say it every time we have one of these meetings, and 80 cents on every dollar collected is labor cost. We're starting with a small chunk of the budget before we even get to, distinct capital items. And I agree with you about the major ones, they're never going to come within the budget. So that's a different conversation. But I think probably a process in fairly short order among people who are paying attention to these issues. We should, if you agree, expand the conversation to cover, all ways to improve the capital stabilization, either by simply putting more money into it to fund more things, or to refocus it in ways that I can't say because I don't know what they are yet, but there may be some alternatives. But which isn't an invitation for permanent process, because that does no good. But I'm agreeing with you. We should address this and sooner rather than later. Does anybody else have anything? I know this call is filled with people who are better on numbers than I am.
So Rob, we've got 3 minutes left. I just want to clarify one thing, perhaps.
I mean, I run meetings that run on time, but perhaps we can squeeze out another 90 seconds, Brian. It's go ahead. Because I know
I respect that greatly. So I just want to clarify the middle high school process and request. I mean, we capital budget did vote to approve, and it was not without debate, I promise you. The funding for the AI3 facilities condition study. Okay.
That's not what I was referring to. If that was your
concern. Yeah, no,
yeah, go ahead.
I just want to clarify because there's a nuance in here. We also knew that work would be required and used if and when, we sought replacement of any of the major infrastructure items at any of the schools, whether it be a roof, a boiler, whatever. They have an accelerated repair program. So we were completely aware that this would be used for that. I don't think anyone really understood that there was an application for a new school building. And that being said, having learned more about this process, I think it's pretty clear that it typically takes multiple tries, sometimes 3 or 4 over the course of a decade to get to yes. And that's presuming that your building actually requires, a major renovation or repair or replacement. Okay. In terms of the full building type program. So that, what's taken place to date is from my perspective, really just the first bite at the apple. I think the real question, at least as I see it, and I'll be focused, and our committee will certainly discuss this at length, is with regards to this request that's in front of us now, this $2 million request, is there really any reason, any compelling reason at all to be pursuing that study without the MSBA at our side, both financially, but more importantly, from an expertise perspective? I mean, they literally participate in virtually, there may be 1 or 2 exceptions, but virtually every school building project in the state. They know more than, every architecture firm combined, everybody in our town combined. It is, and we are a town that does not have recent or credible construction expertise in terms of having implemented multiple major projects. I am extremely concerned that we would go down the path without the MSBA. And my instinct is they know better than anybody in terms of when our building needs to be replaced. So, we will have this conversation with the school. We will hear their case. But to me, the big issue is why in the world would we do this alone when there are experts that have both money and expertise that just understand this infinitely better than we could ever hope to.
I've got two quick things. And first, overall, I agree with you entirely. As far as I'm concerned, there is nothing before either of us until there's something before either of us. But let's assume that that's going to come. One issue on which we'll want my board and your board as well will want is some clarity on whether or not a $2 million study as proposed would be something that could be used in connection with an MSBA project. I'm led to understand it could not. So the only purpose for it would be I watched prior meeting of the facility.
That's my understanding based on
the go it
independent
alone
research as
option.
well. Right.
So yeah, so okay, that's mine as well. So in terms of the go it alone option, like you, we will listen to the committee make its case, and like you, our members will vote. But I think we share similar concerns about that particular item. And I think people who know the MSBA process understand that the MSBA backs winners. And that sounds facile, but it really isn't. They are going to commit to a project from a community where there's a consensus that it's the right scope of a project, and it's going to get backed by town meeting and backed by the voters.
Right.
In addition to all the other criteria, and you're quite right about their expertise, and they see projects all the way through to the end to a final. They don't release the final money until there's a final audit, and it's a very, very controlled and process, and one that they know because they do dozens and dozens of these things at any given time. So I think we'll just wait to see that. And in terms of the other projects, I think, obviously we've got, some other discussions to have that are probably going to go beyond our scope right now. Mike,
Yeah,
I see your hand.
it's just interesting.
Oh.
We don't have a request for town hall right now, and it's not on this list. So as strange as that may sound, that is also not before us at this moment.
Yes, although I believe that, well, I'm not going to speculate, but I bet we will. So, Mike, go ahead.
Recognizing that we're past our 8 o'clock stop time, I want to suggest that we follow up with this same group with Chris Senior and with Jennifer Mullen on the question of the capital budget allocation in the operating budget. Hopefully the operating budget can still be changed, but we should hear from Chris and from Jennifer on how possible that is and what our expectations should be for this year.
I agree. I'll pursue that after this evening, as will Brian, I'm sure. Anything else?
That's it.
Great. Well,
Thank you.
these committees always should have been good friends. So I'm glad that we were able to have such a productive meeting, because I think our charges, if they were a Venn diagram, would have a lot of overlap. So this was really productive, and I think both the meeting and the preparation for the meeting, I learned quite a bit. So thank you for your time. You need to adjourn your
You
meeting.
need to leave?
Brian.
Is that what you're saying, Rob?
You don't have you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here.
Okay.
No, you
So
can
the
in
time is
fact.
8:04. Mike, would you like to move to adjourn, perhaps?
Move we adjourn the capital budget meeting.
Okay, roll call vote. Sorry, I need a second. Susan, do you want a second?
Second.
Great. So all in favor, roll call vote. Michael?
Mike Dick, aye.
Susan?
Susan Franklin, aye.
Brian Host, aye. Ralph Dormitzer? Don't need his vote, but it was a courtesy anyway. All right, we are adjourned. The time's 8:05.
Very good. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for having us.
Pleasure. Okay. So the cool kids have left the meeting. We'll plow on. But I mean, first off, is there any thoughts, comments from advisory on what we just talked about and or what we might be doing? Fran?
Still have that spreadsheet up, Rob.
Yeah, Brian, can you make that take the spreadsheet down? So
Yes, I will. Bear with me one second.
Take your time.
Apologies. So let me take that. Stop share.
Wonderful.
There we go.
there we are. Everybody gets larger. So, Mary?
Yeah, Brian, while you're still here, there are more than a couple things from the schools that are on that list that I mean, we'll hear from them and you'll hear from them again before we will, obviously, that seem ripe for involvement from the Cohasset Sports Partnership, from the Education Foundation, from the boosters. Those organizations thrive when somebody's really leading the charge, and I don't know where that stands, but at least if some 50-50 situations were set up, I think that would really be helpful for some of those things. And then obviously, to Mike's point, whatever we need to do to get in front of Chris and Jen to kind of suss out this appropriation issue, especially as it relates to the roadways. I mean, I know the road plan was initiated. I mean, it's been since Brian Joyce took over that role, so that has to be at least 3 or 4 years old, I would think. Whether that was in facilities bucket before that, or, I mean, prior to 5 years ago, the facilities department wasn't really a department. So, I mean, I'm not sure where all that lays out, and it doesn't matter so much where the money comes from, but now anyway, but as to your point, Rob, it would be really good to know when it shifted and why and so forth.
Yeah. The institutional memory of that, well, we have Chris and, Don may have a recollection of that if we put the question to him. So, Mike,
I can
oh,
tell
I'm
you
sorry,
this.
Brian, go ahead.
So I can tell you this, when we turned it into an actual formal program and started funding it out of capital budget, which you're right, Mary, it was somewhere around 4 or 5 years ago. I'd gone back and just looked at a bunch of annual town meeting and special town meeting warrants, which don't tell the complete story, but there were appropriations for roads specifically in multiple special town meetings coming out of free cash. And then, I was able to, identify the Chapter 90 funds as well. What I couldn't tell, just on my glance at that is whether there was also any type of a funding line in one of the operating budgets, or if they were relying entirely on Chapter 90 plus, free cash at STM. So there might have been a third bucket that was not visible to me.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, it seems like capital budget has enough to noodle on without the roadways, but
I think the idea was to, stop doing it ad hoc and plan it as a formal budget item. And so we all agreed on that. We put it into capital budget. We just didn't put any more money into capital budget. So we probably forgot the most key component in terms of making that work over time. And, that's fundamentally put a pinch on every other department as a result.
Yeah.
Mike?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that, Mary, your point on the Cohasset Sports Partnership really gets to the heart of as we try to put together a master plan, for a better way of stating it, with all these projects, the funding, we've got to get creative in the funding, and it has to be, there definitely has to be entities that step up, like Cohasset Sports Partnership, or if people on fields raise money for it. If for no other reason, just to have skin in the game, because the list of needs is massive and the funding sources is not as big, and that's something that I think just needs to be socialized more. Is that if we're going to really get this stuff done, it has to be a collective effort. Not just with debt exclusions, but fundraisers, grants, things like that. So it's really important, because there's no way we're going to have a shot at getting everything done without that.
Anyone else? Okay, then I think we can move on. Thanks, Brian. So we were going to talk about liaison reports, and I specified the school budget subcommittee because I know it's been active, and I think there's also the sort of the equivalent of an air raid siren warning about some of the stuff that's incoming, particularly from our friends of the planning board and the zoning bylaw committee. There's much there. So why don't I hand it off to any of our three members from the school subcommittee to give us an update, kind of where we're at with that as the budget begins to come together. I realize there's nothing final, nothing's been voted by anybody, but just a sense of how it's going.
I can start if you guys would like, and then you can chime in. So we put together collectively, separately, as to not violate the open meeting law. We compiled a list of questions for the school committee, the chair and co-chair, and the administration, ranging from enrollment, FTEs, the SPED budget, revolving funds and grants, utilities, transportation, staffing, the positions they were looking to add. And I would say overall, we had a really fulsome conversation. I thought it was terrific. I received a really nice email from Lance yesterday, just thanking us for being willing to be a part of the process, which was terrific. There's obviously a way to go, but in large part due to a lot of the institutional knowledge, more from Jean and Ellen than myself, because they spent more time on the committee, and Ellen's rather remarkable number crunching. We were able to really get some great and I think very solid answers, which I thought was terrific. I know Chris met with Patrick and Jennifer and Susan today, and they had a good meeting. And he is encouraged. He called me right before this meeting, so as nothing is anywhere near final, but I felt like it was at least a really good first step. Jean, how do you and Ellen want to comment?
I agree. I think it was a good meeting. I think in the past, there's been a little bit of a feeling that there was animosity in the advisory process with the schools, and for a lot of different reasons. I think that this was a good step in the right direction for having them realize we're not the enemy, but we are realists. And we realize that there's a bucket that only has so much in it. And they can't have it all. We have to share with the whole town. So I think that the chair of that committee is very willing to work with us and the town. It's now that we've laid that groundwork, I think that it's a good mix. I think we had a very good first meeting. It took us a while to get to it, but it worked.
Ellen, did you have anything you want to add?
I mean, yeah, I don't want to repeat what Mary and Jean said. I would summarize that the crux of their funding requests revolve around supporting and enhancing the math curriculum at all grade levels. In that they were very concerned about their MCAS scores from grades 3 through 10 during the pandemic, which is to be expected. A lot of the districts, their scores dropped during the pandemic and remote learning. However, they have rebounded to pre-pandemic levels, but they're not where they want them to be, nor are they where a district of our caliber should be compared to other benchmark districts. We're falling short of Hingham, and we're falling short of Weston, and we're falling, in terms of the percentage of students meeting or exceeding expectations. So they've really identified that as a core piece of their budget ask at all grade levels, from adding a math teacher in 6th grade, from adding math specialists, from reviewing K through 12 curriculum. It's not the whole ask, but it's a big piece of it. And it's also responsive to the concerns of the community and of their constituents, of the parent group. So I think they're addressing that. If you can go, you can see their whole MCAS response plan. It's in Superintendent Sullivan's Navigator newsletter. If you click on the link, you can see the whole plan. And they're also very focused. They also have in special education, which is interesting, a growing percentage of students receiving services than they did before the pandemic. So before the pandemic, say with 1,500 students, they had 220 receiving services, and now they're up to, my notes are a scribble, like 260 out of 1,400 students. So I think the pandemic caused a lot of issues for students, particularly younger students, and what they call social emotional learning. It's dealing with the anxiety of wearing the mask, not wearing the mask, going back into school, into crowded areas, and all of those things that we hear and see now are the impacts of the pandemic and remote learning and masking and everything else. So that's a particular focus on, and how do they provide the services to those students? And so that's a big piece of their strategy as well. There's other things. There's, to the earlier point about maintenance, there's an ask for a custodian based on a survey that was done several years ago. We are short based on square footage and occupancy at the middle high school. I think they're at 7.3 custodians right now. They want to add one. And when you think of the hours and the square footage, I think the building's 220,000 square feet. 7 people to clean it every single day is a bit of a challenge. So that's one of their asks. Another one of the asks is the athletic trainer is currently a 0.5 athletic trainer. He's half-time. He is paid out of athletic revolving. There's the MIAA last fall put in a requirement that the trainer must travel with the football team. So not only are they required to be at home events, but for football, they're required to travel. So our trainer has been doing that because he's a great guy and he's been working full time, but he's a 0.5. So that's in their budget as well. I think those are some of the big points. They're focusing in on class size, sustaining smaller class sizes so that individualized instruction, can be administered where needed. I guess that's all I'll add.
So one of the things I'll just add to those comments was we were able to find out as we kind of really talked through some FTE numbers, that there were 6, I believe, ESPs that are no longer there, that were part of the budget last year. And so they haven't just been adding. Now they're certainly asking for 8.5 headcount this year, but that was also useful information and not something that sometimes I think, we're in our own silos a little bit and they don't quite know how to communicate the message about why they're asking for what they're asking, but perhaps they've found efficiencies over here. So that was useful. I would like to talk about whether it's during this meeting or offline, what the committee would like to see from them for their presentation next week, because to roll through their 40-slide PowerPoint deck is kind of silly. We can certainly send all that information, request questions. I think that's really in some cases, that's absolutely the best way to go about this. If the committee is able to submit any questions they might have, and then they can take a look at those prior to. So I don't know how you'd like to handle that, Rob.
The answer to that question is however you think is best. But I think by establishing your committee and your committee being so active, we've done most of what the advisory committee can do to be help in the schools integrating its budget into the overall town budget. I think perhaps if members of the committee have specific questions that they'd like to see, send them to me with a copy to Mary, and we'll send them to the folks who'll be meeting with us. I think probably sending sooner rather than later the materials from the school department, including the 40, I don't want to sit through a 40-slide deck.
No,
but
there's
I'll
no
read,
reason.
no, but if I have it, I'll read it beforehand. And really, I think perhaps the best approach would be to have the school department identify, significant departures from their budget from last year. Where are pressure points? But like Ellen talked about, various areas of focus. I did see some documents that reminded me of last year where the top line explanation of the school department budget was, here's our budget from last year. Here's contractual pay increases, which include both the base rate going up by 3% plus the labyrinth of steps and lanes that go for that are awarded for seniority and additional educational attainments, minus savings from retirements, but where that nets out. But I think while we all know, and the school committee is surely aware, as they have statutory budget autonomy, and they should, that's how it works, that having some notion of what they're doing inside those big boxes might be helpful, even if they can explain it to us. But if they have an amount of money that requires choices, and this is purely hypothetical, but if the if the choice is between half a custodian and half a trainer, we can't, nobody but the school committee can tell the schools how to allocate money between those choices. It's entirely theirs. So we'll be interested to know, we'll be interested to help, get their gross number within what's available under the budget. But, and if we have specific questions that way, I would just, if anybody had in mind to kind of really get into, and this is, I think it was Gene who said there had been tension in years prior. I think it's a lot of years prior because we've been pretty
Absolutely.
polite. We've been pretty courteous the last few years.
Right.
But, people would, on our committee and others, make very pointed recommendations or demands that the school committee do X or Y with their money, which, I mean, we can certainly make observations and suggestions, but, we can't tell, we're not the boss of them. So, but I hope we can, I really think that this is going to be a year that's very different than any that's gone before in a good way. So now we'll just see if my hopes are all dashed. Mike?
Well, what
Oh, I'm sorry, Mary, then Mike.
what I will do is send out the budget doc that they forwarded to us. Jean and Ellen, what do you think about sending the Q&A sheet?
I think that would probably be good. Maybe send what we sent out and present it to them so that we're not duplicating all of that all over again. I mean, we have
No, I have
answers.
I have a condensed document, so I would
But
just,
we also have the answers to the questions, right?
yes, it's all in one document.
Yep.
So I will do that. So, and then if there's any other questions that arise out of that, I think, Rob, if we could ask the committee to have those questions by Monday so that the administration had time to plan. If there was some data they had to go hunt and peck for, that would be great.
That makes sense. Mike,
But
you've
I
had your
will
hand
send
up
this,
for, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'll send this out tomorrow.
Mike, you've had your hand up for a bit, and then I see Ellen.
Yeah, Mary, Jean, Ellen, this may be a little naive, and I probably should know this better since I have children who have recently graduated from high school or are still in high school. As it pertains to the MCAS, I get it that it's a state requirement. They've got to administer the tests. Is there some funding or something beneficial with scores? Because I know, having gone through the college application process recently, the MCAS don't matter.
No, because it's Massachusetts only, Mike.
Yeah, no, I know, that's the thing. And so, and looking at last year, there was, I forgot where it was published, but there was a list of colleges and universities that the graduates of Cohasset High had gotten into, and it was quite an impressive list of schools. And when I think about, as a parent of a child in a public school, my metric of success is what kind of colleges and universities do they get into? And so for me, and maybe this is a question for the administration, is just by that metric, it appears that, the school, Cohasset schools are very successful. Granted, 1 year does not make a trend, but anyway, so I guess with the MCAS, I know people get hung up on that, and you get compared about versus the state averages and things like that, and where you rank. But at the end of the day, what really matters for the students isn't really the MCAS, from what I see having 4 teenagers.
Mike, you're right. It's not a measure of how well a student is going to do, post-secondary. I think what it does for the educators is they look at the MCAS assessments and the scores, and if you look at the MCAS plan, it really provides the educators with where are they falling down on their instruction, where are they weak in the curriculum, as opposed to little Johnny got, exceeds expectations and Susie only got proficient. It's really about those pockets of commonalities of, I don't know, maybe they didn't teach the hypothesis, what is that triangle? maybe everybody got that question wrong.
Theorem, yeah.
Right. So maybe everybody got that question wrong. So they really need to shore up their instruction on that. That's how they typically have used MCAS results is to refine and look at instruction and curriculum. But I do think that there had been more so at the elementary levels, grades 3, 5, and 8, some very big concerns from parents, because that's what the parents see. Are the kids learning enough? Are they getting, why aren't they proficient in math? I mean, that's how it kind of boils down to at a parent level. But that's how the schools will use the data.
Jean?
Okay.
When you drill all the way down, though, the bottom line is it's a graduation requirement in the state of Massachusetts also. It's kind of like the Regents in New York. If you don't get a certain level on that exam, then you can't graduate.
Well, you don't get a Regents diploma. But-
No, you don't get a Massachusetts diploma.
Yeah, it's different.
So, like I said, that's the most basic answer to your question, but I absolutely agree with Ellen and the reasoning behind what the teachers do and how they do it when they see the exam results each year.
So that's been reinstituted because with COVID for a couple of years, I think the MCAS were off the table or they were optional or something, but now that's back where it's a requirement. You have to have a certain score to be able to graduate high school.
Right. It's a 10th grade. I think that 10th grade group in the 2020, 2021 year, which was mostly the first half was hybrid, half in school, half out of school, and then not in the second half. I think that year was an exclusionary year for that requirement for those 10th graders. But it's a measure. It's a measure of performance. The other thing that I wanted to mention about the budget, they have 2 versions of the budget, and there's long been a desire to do away with tuition-based full-day kindergarten. Cohasset's one of a remaining 10 maybe districts on the greater South Shore area that charges for full-day kindergarten, and the current tuition is, I think it's $3,300 or $3,400 a year for full day. Half day is required to be free by state law, and for the last 2 or 3 years, they've been chipping away. They've been funding $25,000 or $50,000 a year out of their budget to reduce the kindergarten tuition. But they do have 2 plans that include a smaller reduction and then it's a $300,000 one fell swoop to get full day kindergarten tuition free.
Okay.
So you will be, when you look at the budget, and you may have seen some of these numbers, there's essentially 2 budgets that they're putting out there. One that is an increase of 5% and change, which includes fully funding this $300,000 worth of kindergarten. One which is 4% and change, which does not include that. And there is also a pretty big emphasis on, even though the class sizes are relatively small, adding a teacher in the 3rd grade, because that cohort was the grade that was in kindergarten when COVID started. And so they're very mindful and focused on those students.
So Mary, I won't wait till Monday to have my question. I would love, we got the enrollment count from Dr. Sullivan, but I really think that a really comprehensive look back and look forward, I think he provided some of that on enrollment and the average class size, which they used to do on the budget. And so you could see the average class size by section. And then the FTE count, including grants and revolving fund payroll. So out of the 255 FTEs right now, 38 are funded, about 38 are funded from revolving and grants.
Yeah, those, I'd like to pretend I had those questions in my notes as well. Those are those are excellent questions. We've raised the grant funding issue over the course of the last couple of years in a lot of departments, particularly when there's a lot of grant money flowing around. And there has this tendency in all departments to fund a position with a grant, and then the grant expires and poof, it goes into the budget without a discussion. Maybe the answer is yes, absolutely, but without it, there needs to be that discussion. So, and all of the other issues with census and whatnot are important and should be front and center. So hopefully they can come in with that, and I'll post that meeting by Friday with sort of general topics, so we can really kind of put everything on the table for a discussion.
Yeah, we did ask them if they had to rank their new hire requests, what that rank would be. And of course, they're not going to give anything up yet. So that's totally understandable, but perhaps after a few conversations with our town administration, some things might settle out a little bit.
I
We'll
think
see.
I think the takeaway is that it has started positively, and everybody's in, recognizing things that are realistic under the limitations that are, that we live under. So that's great. And thank you again for your time. Anything else about the schools? I think this is another Mary and or Patrick question. What is looming on the horizon in terms of zoning law reform?
Well, Patrick, you got that email. I CC'd you on it, the request of Tom. So according to Tom, and this is from the, Tom Callahan is the chair of the zoning bylaw committee. And they're working on a lot of articles for town meeting. But it seemed a little bit in his response that they were going to be spreading some of those out for a spring town meeting and special town meeting, from what I could garner. So in any event, they're not going to be ready to come to us until probably March is my guess, because they're not going to want to come do a chat, I think, until they have their public forum, which is 2/27. They have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 articles that it looks like will be on the spring town meeting. Some seem to be kind of housekeeping edits. Some are more. And that's kind of what I have from Tom so far.
Yeah, I'm going to be very interested, as I've been with other things, to know whether, town council's role and opinion about these. I've done zoning stuff, but I'm not an expert, and Tom knows loads more about than I do, I'm sure. But it seems to me that there's this body of law out there on zoning, and there are decisions about what zoning provisions mean, and having relative uniformity would seem to be the thing to have, so that your zoning bylaw is consistent with how courts have interpreted them. You have the Torah and the Talmud around it, and you have the explanations and interpretations kind of pre-made. So I'm hoping that what we're getting is something that's going to be, best practices consistent with general usage, rather than something striking and innovative. But I guess that remains to be seen.
Well, one of the good news is that KP Law has the former Chief Justice of the Land Court who's helping with our zoning rewrite. So we have a pretty well-known and scholarly judge who's spearheading or helping with the process. And then I guess the message is we're not going to get it to pretty late in the process. It's not going to be ready for prime time to come before us until relatively late in the process. So we'll probably need to reserve at least half a meeting late in the process for the zoning bylaw article changes. And maybe some of them will drop out between now and then. I don't know, but planning on it for the back end, I think is what we're gonna have to do.
I mean, we still have a lot of empty space on our calendar, and I think that we can probably be more efficient with some of the regular town budget presentations. We should be able to get through the departments more than one meeting, or, you know, one or two departments per meeting, if we're efficient about it. I agree with you. We should, you know, we need to give zoning all the time it needs. Most of us saw what happened the last time the zoning article hit town meeting floor. It was not good. I'm pleased to hear. I knew KP had that person, and I'm glad that she is on our matter, and that'll completely satisfy any concerns I have that these things have been vetted. I'm not sure that I haven't been yelled at by. I mean, I know I've been yelled at by judges, land court. I don't know whether I've ever had the pleasure of that one. But,
Judge Cutler, Judith Cutler.
oh, yeah. Actually, I'm not going to say it in a public meeting, but I have the highest possible regard for Judge Cutler, which is great. I'm a little concerned about getting at the last minute, you know, town meeting coming at coming at predictable intervals seems to catch the proponents of some things by surprise. And, you know, this, to use a word Brian used earlier, you know, these things need to be socialized. There are individual people with individual pieces of property who may perceive that their potential uses and value are going to be negatively affected, and that they need the opportunity to speak to that and get satisfied about, you know, the response, rather than doing on town meeting floor again. So, and I do think, and I'll say this and I'll stop talking, but the boards that are proponents or have reviewed these things, if we make a decision that we recommend these articles, I think we as a board should be prepared to stand up at town meeting and defend that position if there is an interpretation that's being suggested that we believe is not of the proposed change that is not correct. So so good. We'll make plenty of room for that, Patrick. Thanks for keeping track of it. Does anybody else see anything else out there coming over the horizon? Go ahead.
I did run
Yep.
into Mark Cameron, who was basically one of the co-chairs of the town hall building committee. They have hired the construction manager at risk, so they are just waiting on new numbers. And he said until they get them, there's really no reason to start rolling out on their dog and pony show. So I don't know. I think it probably like 3 or 4 weeks. It sounds like they'll have something to chew on. So we should hear shortly.
Okay, that's good. Well, I thought that might be coming when we touched on it earlier. So, so I haven't heard anything else. I did get a message from the chairman of the select board who had some things to fill in about the zoning and town council, but I think that's been covered by Patrick. So I think we're good. But I thank him for being available. And in the spirit of full disclosure, whenever I'm dropping off camera, I am in fact obeying the directions I'm getting from my dog to come in and out of the house, because I'm just his butler, is basically how this relationship is framed itself. So I think that moves us to the administrative business part of this meeting. If I'm not much mistaken, we have, unless there's anything further on liaison assignments and updates, Ellen has circulated a set of minutes, for which we thank her. So if we want to pull those up, I think you circulated them the other day. I have them in front of me. He says line. There we go. These are the minutes from January 18. Did everybody receive them?
I move that we accept the minutes as presented.
Have
I'll
a
second.
second, and then we can have some discussion. We have a second.
Who
Any,
seconded?
who seconded? I thought I heard Jean.
Jean,
Okay, thank you.
So we have any comments? I think we're all here except for Mark, who's present in our meeting. Anything? Hearing none, we'll vote to approve by roll call. Gina Stino,
aye.
Mike Barclay,
Aye.
Fran Collins,
Aye.
Patrick Kennedy,
Aye.
Ellen Mar,
Aye.
Mary McGoldrick,
Aye.
Nick Wheeler,
Aye.
and Rob Hillman is an aye. Thank you, Ellen. You can go ahead and submit those to the clerk's office. Topics, yes,
I'm sorry,
Yep.
in the chat box, there are 3 comments/questions, Rob,
um,
or the
The,
Q&A
uh,
box.
yes, there were the 2 that I mentioned a moment
Oh,
ago
okay.
from the chair, but
Okay,
but there's an update. You caught, select board member, Jean Dippold, says that there may be some fields and rec items out there, not sure. There's a group meeting on February 8th to discuss that, so we'll see what comes from that, discussion as well. And we should probably decide amongst ourselves after that comes in, which one of us will take the point on field and rec. I'm still a little confused about where that's coming from. Is that the select board? Is that the rec department, the recreation commissioners? But it is out there, and at some point there'll be money requests on town meeting warrants, and it'll become our business. So topics for upcoming meetings, I think we touched on, we have kind of an open calendar. I think we should probably schedule the departments to come in, make their presentations, see what's going on with community preservation and some of the other usual suspects. We'll line up capital budget, which I think will be shorter because we've done this. When the time comes, we'll be familiar with what we're talking about. And planning and zoning. So I'll begin to, I think at next week's meeting, we'll fill in, I'll circulate the schedule and we'll start to really fill in those dates with targets and then tell the departments, when we'd like to see them and see if they're available. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
Good. All right. Which brings us to topics not reasonably anticipated within 48 hours in advance of the meeting. I anticipated nothing, so we don't have anything there, which brings us to everybody's favorite motion. Would somebody like to move to adjourn? Gina
Move to
Stino.
adjourn.
A second, please.
Second.
We'll give that one to Patrick.
Yes.
At 8:46.
And the 8:46, I owe you all 16 minutes. So by roll call, Gina Stino,
Aye.
Mike Barclay,
Aye.
Fran Collins,
Aye.
Patrick Kennedy,
Aye.
Ellen Mar,
Aye.
Mary McGoldrick,
Aye.
and Meg Wheeler.
Aye.
Okay, we're adjourned.